Welcome to our webinar today. Hope you're all doing very, very well. I'm Amber from Small Business Britain, and I want to welcome you to our Small Business Britain and Lloyds Bank Academy webinar. Today, we're talking all about cybersecurity. We know it's not always the most popular topic, and businesses don't always want to dive deep into it, but it's super, super important to make sure everything in your business is super safe online. And we've got the lovely Brian Chappell with us today, who's got over 30 years of experience in IT and cybersecurity. Hi, Brian.
Hi, Amber.
Hello, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time today. Brian's going to be talking over expert strategies to safeguard yourself and your business, with some really practical hands-on steps that you can take. So you'll walk away today with some practical, actionable advice to protect your business. I just want to say a massive thank you to Lloyds Bank for continuing to partner with us on these amazing sessions we do. You can access more free help and resources over on the Lloyds Bank Academy. It's absolutely open to every small business. You don't have to be a customer or anything like that. Just search in your web browser and you can access loads of great content over there. We're recording today, so if you miss out on anything, don't worry too much. We will send it to your email box in the next couple of days. Please get involved in the chat. I can see a couple of people in there already. Say hello, let us know your business. And finally, if you've got any questions as we go along, please put them into the Q&A. I'll ask Brian all of your questions at the end. Cool. I can see someone's raised their hand. If you've got anything that you want to say, please just put it into the chat box. Cool. Brian, I'm going to hand over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Amber. And thank you all for taking the time to spend with me here this morning. Apologize for being a few minutes late. I'm literally on the road in Europe at the moment and just walked off stage having presented for my organization. So, and equally why I have a weird background. So let's get into this and actually give you some stuff to move forwards on. So I always like to start when I'm talking to people about me, really. And it's not because I'm a total egotist. I'm actually quite shy, although it might not come across that way. But, you know, we're talking about security here. And I think it's incredibly important in that scenario that you have some confidence that the person you're listening to actually has some experience in this space, actually knows what they're talking about, and is a trustworthy individual. So I just want to give you a little background about me before we then kick on into the actual meat of it. So as Amber mentioned, over 30 years, in fact, 37 years now in the IT industry. It's been my career from beginning to end. In fact, I started with computers when I was just 13 years old and had my first paying piece of work when I was just 14 years old. So I've poked around in just about every aspect of IT in virtually every size of organization. And I've worked for both software and hardware vendors. I've worked for system integrators and resellers, as well as corporates and large corporates and multinationals over the years as well. So I've been on your side of the table. I've had a small business, and so I can appreciate a lot of the challenges that that brings with it. Currently, I lead the product management function with a large cybersecurity company called One Identity. For most of you, we're probably not the scope of a tool that you'll be using on a normal day-to-day basis. We have just launched a new product called PAM Essentials, which is targeted at the small to medium businesses. And I will leave you to go and find that out there on the internet. I'm not here to sell you my company. It's just to give you background about me. I've spent over 12 years now in cybersecurity across two major cybersecurity companies, and I've had multiple roles in both of those orgs as well. You can find me often speaking at conferences, writing articles in magazines, being sought for quotes, and even occasionally appearing on television about cybersecurity. And 2 years ago, with a couple of my colleagues, we wrote I think it's the third or fourth in the Attack Vectors series of books, and this one was Cloud Attack Vectors, and they're all published by A Press. These are very much books that help you understand where you should look to secure your environments and the technologies that you can use and the frameworks that can help guide you in how you do those sorts of things. Again, a lot of this is focused in the enterprise side, but you know, sometimes it's worth just having a poke around in those things to see what's out there, and then to come and ask questions, because sometimes knowing the right questions to ask is key. And there's so much jargon in cybersecurity, and some of that is also what I'm going to try and clear up for you today. So I'm going to ask, a big question here of everyone, which is why cybersecurity? It feels a bit weird to ask it, but what's in it for you in terms of actually getting into cybersecurity and protecting your environment? What's the benefit for you? Because it doesn't matter how big your organization is, you only spend, and there I mean in both time and in money, on something that's actually got value to moving your business forwards. And so, it's good to understand what we're defending against. And one thing I want to caveat here up front is I didn't come to the cybersecurity industry, as somebody to work in it for a long, long while, because I honestly didn't trust them, because they spend a lot of their time trying to scare me into buying their products. I think there are certain facts and pieces of information that you need to know to be able to respond rationally to things. And anything I say to you today is not intended to scare you. It is absolutely just to say you should be aware of these things. Think about them rationally. There's nothing scary about cybersecurity. There's nothing complicated about cybersecurity other than scale in most terms. But the jargon can be a bit much to get through. But so don't get worried about cybersecurity, because the moment you start worrying about something, your decisions get worse. You've got to be able to go rationally. I know these things. I understand the scope of them. I understand there's risk, and now I can make good decisions. And that will always be my objective, and has always been my objective, to try and get people to make good decisions quickly. So we'll get into this. So at the base level, it's a safe space. This is why we do cybersecurity. At the end of the day, it's about being able to do business. You want to be able to do what you actually want to do day to day, which is do your business, make your business bigger, work with your customers, work with your supply chains. That's what you're here for. And we're all here to make money at the end of the day as well, which is what the reason of business is in every sense of the term. But if we think, I've got the picture of the fortress there because I kind of think it fits it as well. That little piece in the middle is so that someone can live safely. And that's really all cybersecurity is about. And we'll come on to some of my thoughts there, but there are different sorts of cybersecurity approaches. And one of the ones that gets mentioned often is the moat and castle approach, which is why I went for this kind of image. Where you build a big secure space and you just have a defense around the outside. It's not really what we need to do today. Even before COVID and we went to a lot of remote working, small businesses are often on the move. You might be a sole trader, you might only be a few people, you might all be working from home now. That idea that you can build a big wall around your networks and your infrastructure and try and protect that has long since gone. And to be honest with you, probably never should have happened in the first place, because those walls need to get closer and closer to each of the things that we have. So we should think about making sure that our phones we haven't opened up too broadly, and that we're not completing those surveys that you find on Facebook about, what star sign you should be, or which superhero you are, or all those kind of things. I even think I saw one a few weeks ago about what kind of potato you were. Those things are actually gathering information from you, information that is probably pertinent to some of your security questions. They're just in different contexts, which leads you to share that kind of information. And we will come on a little bit to the kind of approaches you should take to those sorts of things. And I did another webinar with the Small Business Britain and Lloyds team last year, which covers some of that in more detail, and the recording is almost certainly out there. So have a look at that one. I'm not going to go into quite so much depth on those things there. But yeah, so it's all about a safe space. And when we think about hackers, and I've been in this industry for years, and the moment I think hacker, I think of this kind of guy. This is a hacktivist, we would call them, because that's generally what anonymous tend to operate as. They have an agenda that they're trying to push. But there are different types of attackers. But we always think of the guy who's working long hours, trying to break into our system, sweating over it. And they've always got 6 screens with all these beautiful graphics and things going on, which it couldn't really be further from the truth. in any possible way, especially when they start having holograms and stuff like that. We don't even have that in the industry. So, you know, there's lots of misdirection there. It's for dramatic effect, and the drama does come with it. So it's important when we're thinking about who we're defending against that we understand the principle of it. And this next image may shock you as the reality, but let's just jump 2 slides there. Yeah, as the reality that actually it's highly likely to be somebody sitting in their bedroom, just tapping away, trying stuff, you know, using tools that are out there. And it's often intellectual curiosity that drives them. And certainly we have the term of, you know, black hat hackers and white hat hackers. And there's also grey hat hackers in the middle who are not quite sure which side they want to be on. I'm being cruel there to grey hat hackers. They tend to be people transitioning to white hat. So the black hats are the bad guys. The white hats are hackers who are just interested in the technology and often want to help organizations. And it might surprise you to know that there are groups of security professionals who are often ex-hackers who have meetings and get-togethers, and they're often quite open to businesses coming along and just interacting with them and learning from them because they love to share their knowledge. So, you know, if you've got the time, have a look around for what's in your area. ISACA is a good organization. That's ISACA as somewhere to start talking to. And you can probably find them online as well. So, you know, there's an opportunity there to bit their brains and to learn some stuff along the way. They often do some great presentations. But, you know, I think back to, it was T-Mobile, I think it was, got breached for the 3rd time in a row, and it turned out to be 3 boys. I think there was a 13, a 15, and a 17-year-old in different cities who just ended up working together, and they broke into the system, and they did some damage. This image of this boy, I'm hoping, is totally anonymous because this was actually created by in a darkened bedroom working at a PC at a desk, and this is what I got. So hopefully nobody's going to kind of come at me and say, hey, that's me, stop using my picture. But those are some of the other risks in terms of our operational uses within the world. And so, you know, AI and machine learning is out there as a concern. So I would always ask you just to be very cautious about how you use those things. They're great as tools to help lift you up, but don't rely on them 100%. But anyway, so this is the reality of the situation. And it's likely to be somebody like that because if we go back to the 1984, I think it is, definitely showing my age here, and a movie called War Games starring Matthew Broderick. He was a young boy who had a computer at home, and when he went off to school each day, he would leave his computer dialing telephone numbers. And as you can see, even though these seem to repeat across the screen, they've got different area codes in the US, but it's just going through. And he starts at the area code with 000 and just adds 1 to it and dials the next number and the next number. And it's looking to find computers. And those days, we had these things called modems that talked across the telephone lines. And you've probably, if you didn't ever use them, you've probably seen them in movies. They screech and they make a connection, but it's a point-to-point connection each time. And he would come home at the end of the day and he would look at the systems that had been found and he would go and poke around in them. Kind of intellectual curiosity as well as when most hacking started. It's now big business, and this is an important thing to bear in mind, in that a lot of the hackers are very much like you guys. They're small businesses who are looking to make money in their chosen field. Admittedly, it's crime, not a great route to go down, but money is their driver. And what they're doing now is we don't use modems so much anymore, non-existent, but we do have addresses for every machine that's connected to the internet. It's called an internet protocol address, or an IP address is the short version. But they consist of 4 numbers, and you'll have seen these undoubtedly at some point. It'll be all the 4 numbers are between 1 and 255, and there's a dot between them. But immediately, I'm sure you can see, you can start at 1.1.1.1, and then you can try 1.1.1.2. And this is how they're looking for systems. They're doing the equivalent of a war games dialer, but here in the 21st century, it's actually called an IP scanner or a vulnerability scanner. And they're looking at each system that they find, and interrogating it to find out what opportunities there might be to get into these environments. And there are some very basic levels of security that you can apply that will help ensure they don't find anything or nothing actually useful to them. And when they find nothing useful, they'll move on to the next number because they don't know that number is your business in most scenarios. They don't care that number is your business in most scenarios. All they're interested in is whether or not they can get into the system. And they're looking for the easy route in, because why spend long time, long hours getting into a system to find out actually there's nothing of value behind it? If you are on this call and you are a nation state or a country or a government or a huge multinational, yes, you might have people coming after you specifically. And they'll come with two agendas, really. One is money, and the other is that they don't like how your business operates. And they're the hacktivists who have an axe to grind, and they're just looking to embarrass you or damage your environment. But for the rest of us, it is just they happen to hit your number. They happen to find that you haven't kept your security up to date, and they get into your system and they have a poke around. It may well have happened to many of you. And again, I'm not trying to scare you here. If it happened, you got lucky, they didn't find anything. Let's hope that continues to be the case. But we're going to tell you a little bit here on how we can try to move forwards and help you improve your security in that space. But it's what I call a drive-by attack, which is a terrible analogy because it's not a nice thing in any way, shape, or form. But it's literally like walking along the high street and trying doors. I don't care which business I get into. I'm just looking to get into some business. So, if you're out there thinking, hackers, they're not going to be interested in little old me. Well, they're not. But your IP address could be the next one they hit. It really is random. So, and for me, after 12 years in the industry, and I have no statistics to back this up for you, I can't point to a reference because it's just too big a problem to address. But I'd like to say that probably more than 80%, I would say, of successful attacks probably started as just a scam. So don't be complacent in this. Doesn't mean you have to go out and spend thousands. There's lots of good stuff you can do from the ground up. And I did put a few notes, a few pieces out here that I pulled from a number of websites just to kind of give some views on how small businesses are not out of the frame. And I think we'll probably share these decks with you guys. And in the notes for this one, there's a whole pile of statistics, which, because I was rushing in here, I didn't get to put on a different screen so I could read out to you. But there are lots of good statistics out there about small business and the kind of risks. I can tell you off the top of my head that more than half of the small businesses out there really aren't doing anything in cybersecurity. Just under half of those who've been surveyed in this survey, I think, was 2019 or 2020, so just as COVID was coming in, and about just under half don't believe that they're likely to be hacked. And there's lots of other statistics there. A few bits here in terms of small businesses are attacked by hackers 3 times more often than larger ones. Small business employees are far more likely to be targeted for phishing attacks, where they create emails that seem legitimate and appropriate to the recipient. And they approach them that way because the criminals are very aware of your size of business when they're looking in those spaces. And they understand that, it's not a scenario where you can have, ongoing training for your people all the time. Most of the time, you're too busy doing business to do those things, and they know what the limitations are of your environments. So they see that as a rich source of potential revenue. In most businesses, even yours, you're probably very interested in the smaller repeat business than going after the huge deals, because those consume an awful lot of time and effort. And if they miss, then you've spent a lot and gained nothing. Whereas the small stuff is the stuff that keeps your business moving forwards. They're exactly the same. They're in this for the money. They have employees. They have healthcare. They have holidays. They have training. They have everything that you have in large orgs. And often, I found many of them actually have better customer service than some of the organizations, the big organizations that I interact interact with. So, really do think of them like your own business, that they're being driven by the same sorts of things and often going through similar growing pains, but they know the environment and they know what they're looking for. So I'm going to move on to what is cybersecurity, and we will get a little bit more in depth here. And as you're probably discovering, I tend to talk a lot, and I'm not that big on having lots of stuff on slides because I think it's often a distraction. So it's you can see the picture and see the title and things, and then you can just listen, and please continue to post any questions you have, because it's sometimes difficult to pull the nuances out of this. So for a long while now, I've thought that cybersecurity was the wrong name for what we're asking you to do. We are talking about building that safe space in which you can do business. And that is the fundamental purpose of cybersecurity. It should be part of the fabric of your business. And as a small business, now is absolutely the best time to bake this into the fabric. And in its simplest terms, it's about changing how you approach things just a little bit. Rather than thinking about how can we take this new piece of software, get it into our environment and then secure it, we change the phrase to how can we securely implement this in our environment? Security comes at the front. It's the first thing we're thinking of when we're thinking about adding new stuff. When we're thinking about expanding our workforce, how can we securely add people to our environment so that they have access to what they need to have access to? Just that tiny shift of a word along a sentence actually changes how you approach it. And that's something I really do want you to take away from today. The smaller you are, the easier it is to get on this track of having security at front and center, because those drive-bys are getting ever more frequent. It doesn't matter how big or how small your website is, you will find it's being probed regularly. Back in 2000, I was working for a company that provided specific internet services to the internet service providers themselves. And I was building a server. We didn't actually have firewalls in our environment, and a firewall is a device that controls access in and out of the network. We put firewalls on each of the devices in our environment so that we could work very agilely. And I was building a new machine, a new server, wasn't really thinking about it, and had connected it to the network. The network's connected to the internet. And before I finished installing the software on the server, the machine had already been compromised and was being used as part of an attack on someone else. How I found this out is because my network operations center called me because they'd been contacted by someone who was being attacked. And they were saying, please, can you stop this machine doing it? So I immediately disconnected from the network. We then rebuilt the whole thing again off the network, and then we were able to connect it safely. And that was before I was involved in the cybersecurity industry, but it shows you how easy it is to be compromised. And that was in 2000. You think of how much more internet we have now and how much more capacity there is for that. The opportunity for breach goes up dramatically. So, when you buy a laptop or something, it will have a firewall on it. That firewall will be configured to be very secure out of the box. So don't panic about that. But anytime somebody in your organization or you make changes to that firewall, make sure you understand why, or they make sure they understand why they're doing it and what the risks are to the organization. Because often you can run these things their entire lives without changing those things. So the vendors have gotten better at providing even better, more solid foundation. And, to give you the horror story sign kind of scenario, and, that I sometimes use with large enterprises in terms of investing in cybersecurity, it comes down to this. When a breach happens, and that's what we call it, when an attacker gets into your environment, and I'm going to say the classic thing that you hear from every cybersecurity vendor, which is it's not if you get breached, it's when you get breached. It's that much of a definite thing, because 100% secure is impossible, and we have to understand that. And all the approaches we take in large orgs now actually talk about assuming that you've been breached to start with so that you can defend against that inevitable scenario. I often actually go a little bit further and say it's not if, it's probably, or it's not when, it's all probably already happened and you got lucky. And we talked about that earlier. Again, nothing to panic about, but these are just things to be aware of so that you can rationally think about them and make a good decision. As I say, if it happened, you haven't heard about it, chances are you have nothing they want and you're good for the moment, so don't panic. But actually, when we think about the scenario of being breached, you've got two outcomes of this. You're either the company being breached, in which case you're running around trying to get your systems back up. Some of you might remember that it was Merck, the big shipping company, had a piece of malware that, or ransomware as it's called, and we'll come into the actual definitions of those in a moment. It was a piece of code that spread from machine to machine, encoding the data on the machine so that you couldn't access it. And that stopped them being able to run their automated or their electronic shipping system for something like 3 months. And there were literally people running down corridors, pulling out power cords and cables from machines, trying to stop that spread happening. It's a horrible situation to be in. Planning for those kind of things and thinking about how you react is important, but exactly the same as, I don't know, a pipe bursts in your ceiling and the ceiling comes down and floods the room with water. It's not something you can necessarily deal with, but it's just something you have to look at and go, it happened, now let's deal with it. You can be that person, or you could be the one who's actually gotten ahead of the game, who's got this baked into their infrastructure, who doesn't get breached and manages to mop up their customers. So, there's a real business element to this cybersecurity. You have the opportunity to be the one who keeps moving forwards. And, there are lots of orgs to help you out there when breaches do happen. Please do contact the authorities. Do make sure that you share that information, especially if you store customer or even supplier data. You want to make sure that you ensure that that information isn't subsequently used to breach them as well. It's a cooperative thing. Being breached is an inevitability for most organizations, especially bigger ones, because they have much more opportunity for that. But it's also vitally important that it's not something that anyone should be ashamed of it happening, even if you're doing your absolute best. It could potentially happen, and we all need to be open and honest about it so that we can stop the spread of these things. So, I'm a very big believer in that. But, from that, if we think about that impact of the breach itself, it actually affects your business, your ability to do business. So when we do good cybersecurity, we're actually doing business resilience or operational resilience, or sometimes called corporate resilience. So it's about the resilience of your business. And so again, this is why it's so important, because it is so fundamental. We're so dependent on IT these days to run our lives and our businesses, that we do need to make sure we're just thinking that extra time. When something unusual happens, always take that pause, always take that beat to give yourself time to think about it before making the decision and moving on to do something else. So I often talk about cybersecurity as actually being better named as business resilience. And I can't help but share this, but I am involved in a thing called the Institute of Corporate Resilience, which just got its institute status recently and is launching its memberships and all sorts of things. So if you look for the IOCR, you might find somebody who can at least help you, point you in the right direction of some of the tools that are out there. I'm just a volunteer within it, but it was something we all felt needed to be done. So more support for you guys out there to help you get more knowledge about what's going on and help you find people who can help you more. Yeah, that is my next slide. So this is another machine learning generated image I was exploring as I was building this slide deck to try and produce slides that gave images that help relay some of the thoughts I was going on for. And I'm going to tell you about how I described each of these, the machine learning, as I did earlier. Here I said I wanted a mosaic of doors, windows, locks, and padlocks. And this is what the machine learning came up with. If you look carefully, it's all a bit fuzzy in places and a bit weird, but I actually do think it's quite a strong image in terms of bringing those things together. Because security and cybersecurity, physical security and cybersecurity are not that far apart from one another. It's all about controlling access to things so that only the authorized people get to pass through the doors or the windows because the locks are configured or you have keys that allow you to pass through them. And this has been the same for millennia, for thousands of years. We all use usernames and passwords, and the term password comes back all the way from, I think the earliest documented instances of it are the Roman Empire, and they were called watchwords then because it was a word you gave to the watch to pass through into the encampment, and they would be distributed on a daily basis via tablets, and they would track the tablets with the watchword on it through the camp and back to where they came from, so you knew they'd all been returned. But it was the thing that got you through. At that point, everyone used the same watchword, so not quite as good as passwords. But controls become more refined as your attackers become more refined, because I'm pretty sure it didn't take the people who wanted to attack the Roman Empire, probably us as Anglo-Saxons, from listening in, hearing the watchword, and now you know it. It's the only thing that's being used to validate yourself. As we move forward, I'm sure you have usernames. Probably many of you using things like Microsoft Office 365. So you have a something at something email address, which is your username. You'll have a password. I use Windows Hello to authenticate into this very machine on a regular basis. I don't use my password very often. There are keys, there are tokens, and there are all sorts of things you can use for authenticating. But at the end of the day, that's your key. It's the thing that gets you through the lock, which is your login screen, and through the door into the system that you want to access or the application. And in fact, in the talk I did just before this, I used the analogy of a bank and thinking about the protections on a bank. And we always think of bank as being very secure, very safe place. But when you start to boil it down with your journey into the inner sanctum of the bank, you start at the outside of the bank, and there's a door, and the door has a lock, and there's probably a camera pointed at the door to see who's there, and also to monitor people going in and out. And when we get into the lobby and we see all the lovely tellers who are there, they're behind, these days, protective glass. I am old enough to remember where there was literally nothing between you and the teller. Better times, I might say, but life is a lot better than it was then anyway. But to get to that next stage to where the tellers are, you will go through a door with a lock with some kind of monitoring. It's probably another camera. And as you proceed through each stage of the bank, all the way down to the vault itself, where you're stood in front of the biggest door you've ever seen, with the most complicated lock you've ever seen, and the most broad set of monitoring tools or devices to control and to see who's going in and out of that door, it's still a door with a lock and some kind of camera or monitoring pointed at it. And it's the same when we're thinking about securing our environments. This is what cybersecurity is. It's about putting lots of doors between the person who wants to get from the outside of your your environment to the very center of it. And it doesn't have to be hundreds. We could be talking a handful of doors. Because if we go back to that thing of it being a drive-by, the moment they start to have resistance to their progression into a system, they will start looking for the next easier target. And that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to prevent them from quickly and easily getting to the center of your environment and the goodness that's in the middle there. You want to make it unpleasant for them so that they want to move on and try the next one. And hopefully those monitoring pieces that you have in place or will have in place at some point will provide you some information to say somebody was progressing through or somebody was trying to progress through a system, and then you'll be able to take some additional actions at that point. We are getting into a little bit more sophisticated cybersecurity than the very smallest of orgs will be doing, but keeping an eye on what's happening in your environment, being aware of when activity is going on in your environment, and some of the things that you will start to learn how to do in that space. But yeah, think of doors, windows, locks, monitoring devices. It really doesn't get much complicated and more complicated than that. And just as they say, it's not rocket science. Rocket science isn't rocket science. If you ask a rocket scientist, they think it's quite easy. It's about familiarity. It's about understanding the terms and it's about being relaxed and calm. It's nothing to panic about. So thinking about those terms, I've grabbed 5 here. I was trying to bring a big, nice, comprehensive list, but I thought let's just try and focus on some of the ones they use within the scope of this this chat, and the ones that might be more relevant to you. So I'll often use the term of vulnerability, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a gap, a chink in the armor. And they tend to come in 2 basic versions. There's a technological vulnerability and there's a human vulnerability. So if you've heard about phishing, and hopefully you have, because otherwise that's a pretty good rock you've been under. But, you know, that's about exploiting people. There's a wonderful book by a woman called Jenny Radcliffe, who calls herself the People Hacker. And she used to do some very suspect things in her past. And is a fascinating person if you find any of her recordings online, but her book takes you through some of the exploits she used to do in actual physical security penetration, but she now also talks in terms of cybersecurity, and she will really flesh out human vulnerabilities for you. So I'm not on commission, but she's somebody I've spoken with at conferences before, and I mean both of us speaking on stage there. But great one. Technological wise, it tends to be a software bug. Hopefully that resonates with all of you. An error in the code of the software that causes an opportunity to gain some access into the system. An error or a mistake, that could be I've misconfigured something in the environment, or I've overly opened up a firewall or some other device in the environment, all the way through to I clicked the wrong button. But these are things that can be exploited, and they're things that we should be aware of. And you can get things like there's a vulnerability scanner called Nessus, Nessus. It is hosted by a company called Tenable, Tenable. It's free if you want to use it. It isn't the easiest thing in the world to use. If you've got Windows, you've already got Windows Defender, which is doing some of that as well. So when Windows Defender is popping up and telling you there's a suspicious application on your system or whatever, please pay attention to it. Please quarantine that. Look at it. Try and find everything out you can. If you need to ask questions of somebody, go and do it. And asking questions is a big thing in cybersecurity. Don't assume stuff. So that's a vulnerability. The attack surface, as it says here, this is kind of the thing that the attacker can touch without you knowing they're touching it. So if you're just a single person in your home, you've got a router in the corner, the router has a firewall on it, and the outside of that is all the attacker can see. That's your attack surface. If you have things like Office 365, your attack surface actually grows because Office 365 itself is accessible to the entire network, and it is getting probed continually. And there have been ways in which that can be breached in the past. They're not easy ways, and Microsoft has defenses against them as soon as the ways are identified. That's how they do what we call mitigation, which isn't in the list of common terms, but means exactly what it says. Malware I mentioned earlier, and this is software written, it's a program written to damage data, steal data, and or prevent the operation of your environment. And those are generally the 3 things that hackers are looking to do in your environment. They're looking to get in to often to steal data. They're often looking to damage it so that you can't use it, so it impacts your ability to move forwards, or just to shut your systems down. Because those are all things that they can blackmail you with and put leverage on you to release your systems. Sometimes they do more than one, and that's where it can get sometimes really annoying when they damage data and steal the data before they damaged it, so that if there was anything in there you didn't want the rest of the world to see, they could threaten to release it if you won't pay to restore the data. And this is where we get to ransomware, which hopefully everybody on here is familiar with as a term. It is just one type of malware. It is a piece of software. It's designed to jump from machine to machine in an environment. So once it gets through your firewall, it will just spread across your systems. It's less prevalent these days in some ways. It tends to occur when there are particular vulnerabilities that have been identified. Those vulnerabilities are often called 0-day, which means we might be aware of it, but we're not aware it can be exploited. So we're kind of at day zero in terms of being able to do something about it. Those are often used in that scenario, and they're actually quite hard to defend against. But by making sure that you have appropriate permissions in your environment so that not everyone in your environment has full admin access to everything, even their own workstation, you can contain those kind of things. And that's one of the things you think about when you're thinking about cybersecurity, is that containment. And generally, they'll offer to decrypt your data, so they encrypt it, so encode it up so that you can't use it. And they'll offer to decrypt it for a fee, often using a crypto coin like Bitcoin, because it's much harder to trace than money moving around. And the last one is the attack chain. This is a phrase which unfortunately one group often refer to as the kill chain, which I think is just a little excessive in terms of approach. It's just a sequence of events that lead to your breach. And nearly every breach follows an attack chain at some level that starts with a vulnerability, which is how they first get onto the system. And then they tend to look for privileged access, so having more access than you have as a standard user, to allow them to move across your network, to move to another system where maybe you're storing more of your critical data, or it might even be on your machine in a folder that is normally secured away. So these things are very common. These are easy things to get to learn and know, and certainly phrases to be aware of. So let's get to what to do first, because I do want to leave a little time, because I see there's a few questions have come in. So I'm very much in the scenario of getting the biggest bang for your buck. You know, in a small business, you don't have lots of money sloshing around to spend on cybersecurity. And to be honest with you, it doesn't matter if the biggest multinational in the world, while the amount of money that you have available gets bigger, in terms of your actual turnover, it can actually be smaller as a percentage of it, and you've got a lot more to protect. So it can actually be equally as hard for them, if not harder, to move in this direction. But let's make sure that we give you some things here that can get you moving forwards, and some areas that you may not have considered yet. So quick wins. And I do talk about this in my other presentations, but keep your software up to date. If you're being told your Microsoft Office needs to be updated, or your Google Apps, or your Windows operating system, install the update. Many years in the past, it used to be always a big concern when an update came out, because you would install it and it might cause the programs now to crash, and it would be terrible. But the level of testing we do on these things now means that the majority of software just update it, because that new version will have fixes for the vulnerabilities that have been discovered since the last version you installed. In many ways, I kind of call it low resolution patching. It's just I'm going to get all the patches in one update, and I'm going to do that thing. And, I'm religious of this at home. I want to keep those things up to date, even though I've got some great protections around it. Again, it's like building another little wall around each application. You're making sure each application is individually secure as you do these things, or as secure as it can be. Passwords is one of the areas where I live a lot of my time, and the reuse of credentials, so that's your username and password together, is just something we shouldn't be doing today. LastPass, 1Password, Dashlane, there are password managers out there that can help you make sure that every one of your systems that you access has a different username, or that even if it's the same username, a different password, a long, complicated password, because they'll often plug into your browser and fill in those details for you. But it's so vitally important, because sometimes it doesn't need to be you who gets breached. If some service, some other small business you use, and you have an account on a web-based portal that you use, and that gets compromised, and you've reused that username and password for your internet banking because you don't want to remember too many passwords, the hacker will come and try that password at every other system that they can find with your username. That's one of the first things they're going to do. And you can buy huge lists of these kind of things on the deep web to take an attack. But if every one of your passwords is different, and every one of your passwords is long and complicated, the chances are they broke into that system, and they probably broke in through the back end. So it wasn't your credential that compromised in the first place, but it stays there. The breach did not spread. And again, that containment thing about trying to limit how useful each breach might be. So please, 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 and I can't say that enough, get yourself a personal password manager. They normally are only a few pounds or a few tens of pounds per year. I'm personally a 1Password user and have been for many, many years. I've just converted my wife over to it as well from LastPass. And you can get a family account, I think, for about £35 a year, which you could use within your business and not too worried about that sort of thing. And you can have up to 5 years on that. So that's pretty cost effective for the £7 a year per person. And the benefits are huge. But even if you're not using it for your business, get one for your personal stuff as well, because it's just worth it. It's absolutely worth it. Don't just rely on the ones that are in your browsers. They're great, they're getting better, but there are more things in life than just websites. I mentioned this, use long and complicated passwords. Because of password managers, we're not in the situation where we have to remember our passwords or jot them down in little notebooks. And we also don't have to create them. The tools will generate entirely random passwords. You won't be able to read them, you won't be able to pronounce them, and when you have to type a really long password and the odd times it happens, yes, it is a bit of a pain. But in all honesty, it should happen so infrequently that it's less of an issue, and the benefits are massive. Short passwords, every time a site gets breached and they manage to steal all the usernames and passwords, all those passwords go into an even bigger list somewhere. And again, these are things you can buy, and every dictionary word you can think of with symbols and with letters, numbers replacing letters in the words, with capitalizations in weird ways. Yes, we've thought of all of those. They're all in the list. Try and avoid those kind of things. Purely random and long and complicated is how you get safe. And it doesn't really cost you very much to do so. Two-factor authentication, you may have heard this term. Using Windows Hello is, one factor of authentication. When I log in with my username and password, and maybe I have a code on my mobile phone which ticks over every 30 seconds, that's now 2 factors because I've got my password and my username. I am a bit of a purist, not saying your username is one of the factors, but it's generally easily guessable. But any website that offers you the ability to have 2-factor authentication, turn it on. Most of the password managers can be the second factor as well. They can provide that code, and 1Password for me in the majority of websites would also automatically fill that in for me, so I don't even have to worry about it, whether I'm on my laptop or my phone. Oh, well, I've done that one. A password manager help with the previous 3 items. So yeah, I can't express that enough of how important that is. And for things like phishing, so an email or an SMS that you weren't expecting, especially if it's asking for urgent action from you, even if it's from your boss in your small business, or it's from your bank manager or your insurance person, or it says it's from HMRC, or any of those kind of things you weren't expecting. Go on the web to whatever organization it is, or if you've got the person's contact information, like a phone number, call them. Ask them if it's them, if it seems at all suspicious. Hackers do put spelling mistakes, formatting errors into these emails deliberately to try and filter out the people who are not paying attention, because they're the ones who are most likely to go all the way through and lose the game. So that's, again, pause, think about it. Does it seem even a little bit suspicious? No company is going to be upset with you for calling them, say, or even government org, is this you? And they'd much rather hear about it, because it's in their benefit as well. Moving on from just those basics, those quick wins, there are some other things that I kind of mentioned, some of them. Eliminating vulnerabilities, so using something like Nessus or one of the paid-for vulnerability scanners just to check your machines, or have somebody, get a partner, an IT company can come and do these things for you, even just periodically. It really should be a regular thing, but something is better than nothing. Controlling privileged access into your environment. I said, the attack chain is normally vulnerabilities and then look for privilege. These are the first 2 things. You do this, you're going to eliminate 95% of the risk in your organization. And this is about, putting some controls in place to say, these are the people who can go onto the servers that we have or the network devices and make changes to them. And it's in a controlled way. We don't reveal credentials. We keep control of the credentials, all that kind of stuff. There are some good tools there. I mentioned the PAM Essentials things that I've just launched. I'm really excited about that. It's I built this from the ground up as an approach, and I think it's going to be really helpful. It's web-based, so it's really easy to use. And hopefully it's not too expensive, but that's there are lots of solutions out there. PAM Essentials is one. There are lots. Go look. I'm not advocating one over the other. Configuration management. There are lots of systems out there. Lots of companies and research departments who publish information about how to secure your environments more effectively and give you the configurations. And many of them are free. And you can take those and you can use those as the basis when you're adding more systems to your environment to make sure they start secure. Patch or update your software regularly. I put that in the quick wins, and it is also here in the cybersecurity foundations. These are the things that really make the biggest difference to your environment. Keep your system your environment secure. And then lastly, as you do begin to grow, and maybe not everybody knows everybody in the office or is intimately familiar with everybody in the office, you have people coming and going, make sure that the life cycles of their accounts in your environment are being managed in some way, even if it's just in a spreadsheet to start with. Make sure that when Brian leaves the company, you disable all of Brian's accesses, however much of a nice guy he is. We want to make sure that we're secure, because it might not be Brian using Brian's credentials to come back into your environment at some point in the future. So those are always things to consider. So getting on top of those things, that's probably as you begin to get a little bit bigger, but good to start doing even in spreadsheets and things like that now to keep control, so you know where these things are being granted and you've got a record of it, and you can make sure you keep that up to date. And I had this in a slightly different way in my last presentation, and I just love it because I saw it as a meme with different things some while ago. But yeah, don't believe everything you read on the internet. I would say I'd probably go to say, as far as say don't believe anything you read on the internet. But obviously, there are some vendors and people out there who are actually trying to help. But as the handsome Joey Essex there, born in or died in 1276, said, don't believe everything you read on the internet, because there is an awful lot of misguided stuff out there. Find the right people. So in summary, and I reckon we're down to about 5 minutes, cybersecurity, it's about resilience. It's about making sure you can keep doing your business safely while perhaps others around you are not. And it's worth the investment, just the same as if you've got an office. Even in your home has a lock on it, your office has a lock on it, your office building has a lock on it. Put a lock on your environments. Make sure you know what's got locks on it and make sure they're good locks. Understand the risks. Don't get scared about any of this. IT, cybersecurity, it's not scary, it's not complicated, it is all simple stuff. It only does what you tell it to do. And most of the failures are where people tell it to do the wrong things, and that can be a little scary. But seek help, ask questions. There are lots of us out there who are just too happy to help you move forwards. And remember that getting compromised, getting breached, rarely ends with your company. They will take data from your company. They will use that data, if for nothing else, to form phishing emails that supposedly come from you looking for key things or chasing payments. And they will use that information to move on. It never stays in one place. So you don't want your customers and supply chain to cause you to be breached, and equally you don't want to do the same to them. And if you are, share the information, let them know they're at risk. They will thank you for it, even though you may see some reputational damage as a result of being breached. I am working my hardest to try and get rid of that stigma. No one should be embarrassed about being breached, because it is almost an inevitability. I haven't had enough coffee this morning. It isn't complex, as I say. So with that, I'm going to say thank you, and we'll get into some of the Q&A and bounce through that. So Amber rejoins us.
Hello, Brian. Thank you so much for that session. I found it super interesting. The stats that you mentioned at the start about I think 50% of small businesses aren't doing anything about their cybersecurity. I think that's a massive statistic, and we probably need to do something about that. So everyone on the call is doing the right thing today by joining. We've got a few questions, so I am just going to quickly go through those. Do you have a few more slides? I think we've got some
Oh,
learning
yes, we do.
for anyone that's interested. So we've got some free learning available on Lloyds Bank Academy. You can see on your screen. We'll also include it in the follow-up email. So don't worry, you don't have to quickly note down the links. But we've got how to recognize email scams. We've also had a few questions about that today. So that'll be really helpful for you guys, and the A to Z of scams. So I think that's quite interesting to just make you guys aware of it. I'm going to dive into a couple of questions because I know we've only got a couple of minutes. And Brian, you're a very busy man. So um, we've got a few people that got into a bit of a spot of bother with their small businesses. So, number one, we had all our photos and personal files compromised when we had sorted it out, sort of stored it on a cloud provider by ransomware and lost all of our data. How do we protect or recover them?
Yeah, I mean, this is a challenging one. Generally, when you get files stored up into a cloud provider, they'll often store backups of them for you and allow you to come back. But ransomware and most malwares, these guys are really, really smart guys. They realize where you're storing data and they will recognize those things and they will find ways to ensure they do the damage so that you can't get back to those things, back to those resources that you had. Often it's just about making your own backups of your data, controlling the access to that information as well. I have seen organizations where they keep the store of information, of company information, in read-only form. So then even the ransomware can't overwrite that in most situations. Or they keep an offline copy, so they're backing up to tape or to optical media or even up to the cloud, but via a mechanism that then isn't directly accessible from the machine itself. So if we think of Dropbox and OneDrive and that as storing stuff in the cloud, that's instantly replicated up and it's from what's on your machine. But if we back it up to a proper backup environment, then we're moving the data away. And if you're on the machine that has the data that's encrypted, you can't get to that thing very easily. So those are the best ways to approach that.
Amazing, thank you. Also a question here about are there any standards, recommended standards that the small business websites need to have met to make sure that they are protected or have a reasonable level of protection?
Um, I'm gonna now go completely blank on what it's called. We have an astonishing organization, which is the National Cybersecurity Center, which is, I think, the NSCS. It's based out of, GHQ in Cheltenham. They really are the heavyweights of cybersecurity, but they have a whole kind of certification and self-assessment capability on their website, where they can give you some guidance on what things you should be looking at. Cyber Essentials, I think that's what it's called, ironically, in that. So yeah, go and have a look at what they've got. You will probably also find that your local police force, or at least your regional police force, will also have a cybersecurity unit who are more than happy to talk to you about what you're doing and how you should be doing things and give you guidance and advice, and also become your first point of call if you think something bad is going on. So there's lots of help out there. And, Lloyds are doing their piece with the academy as well in trying to help you as your banking partner, or, as a banking partner, to help ensure that you have the tools that you need. But yeah, just have a look around out there. I would start with the NCSC, and they will then give you guidance on from there.
Amazing, thank you so much. Just two more quick questions before we wrap up today.
Yep.
So Christine has asked, what do you think about finger touch? Is it better to use or use different fingers on different devices?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're talking there about fingerprint recognition, I think there is talking about different devices. I think that's less of an issue because between the devices, when you put your finger on it, and this is where I get into huge arguments with my colleagues about passwords, what happens is that in the back end, some part of the system is generating a long string of characters that relate to your fingerprint. And that's what's actually used to either encrypt information or to pass information back and forth. That's likely to be different across devices anyway, because when you put your fingerprint down, it's actually read in different ways on different devices. And you will run out of fingers quite quickly. And that's not something you can add any more of. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. But, hopefully that's one or two elements, because the device itself becomes part of your factors as well. In a lot of environments, there's a thing called device trust that Google are very much leading in there, but everyone else is now joining, where it looks at the device itself and says, do I know this device? Is it the one I expect to see you coming, Christine, coming to this system from? And it uses that as part of the analysis it does when it's saying, are we going to let Christine log in? So it's your mobile. It's still your mobile. It's still on the same SIM. It's still got the same serial numbers in it. It's still got the same kind of software configuration, and it's your fingerprint. That's like 4 or 5 factors coming forwards to help you authenticate. So I would just use whichever finger is most convenient, because if you're like me, I'll forget which one I used if it was more than one.
Oh my God, that's such a good point. Forget about forgetting passwords, like forgetting which finger you've used for your fingerprint.
Absolutely.
So, last question. Due to the nature of my business, I receive lots of emails with links to them with Word documents or other kind of files. I don't always necessarily know the sender, and I'm slightly dubious about clicking on these links. How can I be sure they are safe? Can your laptop be hacked by just clicking on an unsafe link?
Okay, so to get to the last piece, yes, is the answer to that one. It's possible. I'm not going to say it's likely, it's possible. As they say, most laptops these days have things like Windows Defender, which are watching for malware, they are watching for vulnerabilities, and they're watching for misconfigurations as well. So they tend to be fairly secure, but you cannot just rely on that. Anytime you get an email to say that you don't recognize from an organization or from an individual, pick up the phone, call them and ask them. That's your most solid way of verifying if it was them. Then it's likely that you can go and click on the link. If you're a bit more technically savvy and you feel it's confident that no spelling mistakes, that it is in exactly the format you'd expect, that it doesn't look odd in any way, shape, or form, often you can just hover in a PC or a laptop over the link. And in the bottom status bar, or sometimes it appears just below, depending on your email client, it will show you the actual link, because sometimes what's written on the screen is not where it's actually going. First, if those two things are different, other than it being click here and having a web address, if it's got a web address and it's different, that's immediately alarm bells that something odd is going on. And look very carefully at where the dots are in these things. URLs, as they're called, uniform resource locators, is the technical jargon, but it basically just means this is how you describe where you want to get to. It's a locator. They will create new ones that look very similar and may just have 2 letters swapped or a slightly different spelling, or they'll try and put all the information in the first piece of it and then the rest of it just looks like garbage. So just have a look at that. If it is what you expect it to be, then it may be safe to click on. But even when you do click on them, just be conscious of what you're getting to. Watch for your little padlocks in the corner. Unfortunately, if you do hit something that is malicious and your machine is susceptible to it, there is no 5-second rule. There isn't for dropping toast anyway. Germs are just instantly on there. But we all like to think there's a 5-second rule. There is no 5-second rule for that kind of thing. The moment you hit that thing, it will breach you and they'll get into your environment. And I used to do a live hacking thing where I sent a PDF to a salesman, which said, oh, I've got some money and I need to spend it immediately. I've used your product before, so I don't need to test it. Here's a purchase order. Not a sales guy in the world who doesn't double click on that. And literally the moment it's done, I was into their system and I could take control of it. So it really is that quick. Yeah. So it is always worth that phone call. If you're at all suspicious, it's not embarrassing. Don't feel bad about it. Better safe than sorry, always.
Amazing. Brian, thank you so much for your time today. I know we have run slightly over and you're a very busy man, so we'll let you
It's
go.
fine.
A huge thank you, and thank you for all the businesses joining us and putting in your questions. It's been a very insightful session today. We have been recording, and I know a few people asked about this, so we'll be sending it to you in your email box so you can catch up. You can send it to your teams, you can send it to any small business that you think needs to listen to the advice we've shared today. Any final words, Brian, before we wrap up?
I would say generally for things like passwords and those basics I talked about, I would just implore you to do them. They may take a little time, they may cost you a little bit of money, but they're just going to pay dividends in the long run. And however boring or uninteresting it seems, keeping your business moving forwards is the hardest job I think most of us have. And it's just worth taking the time. I'd much rather never have to have the conversation or see you on in the press as being breached.
I know it's really sad when it happens to businesses. So
it is.
Use Brian's tips to prevent that from happening. I'm going to use one of those. I think LastPass that you mentioned. One of those. I'm gonna.
Password.
One pass. Sorry, one pass. No, actually, I think LastPass was the one that got breached in the past. I think
they have been breached a couple of times. I mean, it shows you that even the professionals are not immune to it, and that goes back to that thing of it's not if, it's when, and it's just about how you put stuff in place to contain it. They didn't do too well a couple of times, but they learn from it every time, and that's the thing we have to accept. It's not, you can't look at them and say that was terrible, it was awful, it should never have happened. Maybe true, but they learn from it every time, they get better every time, and that's all that any of us can hope to do in this situation.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Brian. Really appreciate your time today. We'll be back with more Lloyds Bank Academy webinars very, very soon, so keep an eye on your emails. We'll have lots of amazing trainers for you. I'm going to let everyone go. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you soon. Bye.
Thanks all. Take care.